Hi everyone, my name is Vibha and I'm going to talk to you today about the informatics of decision making, which is basically decoupling or untangling of this term data-driven decision making you see thrown around very often in not only the product management space but also tech as an industry. So when I first began thinking about this presentation, I started with finding out how many decisions after all can a person make in a day. And the first search result that appeared said 35,000. I was shocked to see this, and even more shocked when I realized that we are awake for about, let's say, 16 to 17 hours a day, and out of which we work for around 8 hours, at least during the weekdays. And of course, there are breaks, but we do effectively end up working for at least 5 to 6 hours every day, which means on an average, we are making 10 to 12,000 decisions during our day at work. And of course, this includes trivial decisions like which conflicting meeting to attend or when to take your break or who to reply first on Slack, but still includes significant decisions around the product or the problem space that you're working on. So while we are at it, while we're making so many decisions, let's make sure we're doing a good job. So here's a little bit of introduction about myself. My name is Vibha Choudhary. I have almost 7.5 years of experience in tech industry, and I started my career as an engineer, and I worked in India and Australia before moving to US for my MBA. Which I secured from Michigan State. So go green for all your Spartans out there. And a very recent finding or very recent thing that I've been hooked on is the series called Age of AI, and also listening to the Moonshot podcast. So please check it out if you want to. So with that, let's keep moving forward and let's start talking about what we're here to talk about. This is a very simple yet relatable example of grocery shopping, which I think most of us do at least once in a week. So of course you wouldn't go through creating a whole table and nerding out like I did here. But while selecting the store, which would be your first step, you are going to still do some mental calculations and mental mapping and figure out things like what grocery items you want to buy or how much money you're willing to pay, how far away these stores are from your place, or how much safety are they ensuring while you're doing grocery shopping. So the argument that I want to make here is that using numbers and facts and drawing insights to make a decision is something you're doing on an ongoing basis, probably multiple times a day without even any realization. So here are a few more examples of how we are inadvertently doing this. So if you found yourself in a situation where you have planned a trip to align with the cheapest fares, or you are trying to decide which movie to watch and you end up landing on IMDb to check the ratings or reviews of that movie. So basically what you're doing in all of these scenarios is you are relying on data. So the observation here is you're already doing this. You're already considering data. These numbers are guiding you towards a decision. So the concept, it's not new, right? Our minds are already trained to do this inadvertently. So when we already have a data-based mindset, why not use the same approach and expand it further to make decisions at work? So what it's not is a course on data analytics or your data analytics 101, because you do have a whole team that you can rely on for that. You do have tools like R or Tableau or Mixpanel to do the heavy lifting for you. All you need to know is how to interpret the information being presented to you and what data to look for. So my goal with this presentation is to simplify some of this for you. And the reason I am emphasizing on information and not data is because our decisions should be informed by data, because data without context is not helpful. But when we do assign some meaning to that data by looking at it from the perspective of a goal or an outcome we want to achieve, that's when this data has the power to help us achieve that. So use information as a compass to guide the direction and remove any kind of biases. So as a product manager, if you were in a situation where you had to pick between a great design and a quick technical implementation, or getting an MVP out versus prioritizing based on long-term vision, or just picking between promoting adoption or curating or customizing a feature for unique customer needs, a simple yet powerful answer to all these questions is be data oriented. If you are going to have a bias, be data biased. So vast majority of all the decisions that you're going to make as a product manager fall under one of these facets. So the first one is create, which is basically identifying what you want to build and how you're going to prioritize it. The second one is around evaluation, so measuring the success and performance of what you've built so far to evolve the product roadmap. And lastly, communication, because by now we know that product managers are not supposed to be the CEOs of product. You have to not only incorporate inputs from stakeholders, but also make them a part of decision making. At the very least, convince them about your decision. So let's go ahead and explore each one of these. Is how to decide as a product manager what to build and how to prioritize the features. Here's this example of Netflix. The graph that you see on the right hand side, one thing to notice here is going on from 2013 Q1, Netflix noticed an uptick in the number of subscribers and outgrew the number of cable subscribers within a period of just 4 months. So this success, what led Netflix to achieve this was a decision they made based on data. So Netflix looked at all the data that they already had about their viewers, the ratings they are giving the shows, the viewing histories, what shows people like, and so on. And when they use that data to discover all of these little bits and pieces about the audience, like what kind of shows do they like, or what kind of producers do they prefer, or who are their favorite actors, once they had all these pieces together, they then decided to come up with this new show and license 2 seasons without even vetting its performance, which was House of Cards. So because Netflix made a decision based off of data, they were able to witness a 3x improvement or increment in the number of subscribers, in their sales, and in their market value over a period of just 3 to 4 years. So my mantra here is to always research and then build. Also, fun fact, the term binge watching was coined because Netflix discovered the secret formula for dedicated viewership based on the attention span of the audience, which was found out to be 8 to 10 episodes in each season with 40 to 50 minutes of time duration. So moving along, there is another important factor here, which is the why. You need to know the why before you're making that decision on what you're going to build. And the why for Netflix wasn't to create a good show, but rather transform itself from being a service provider that broadcasts shows to being known for a platform that produces Emmy or Oscar-worthy content. And when they clarified this why, they invested in shows that got them where they are right now. So here is my take on a 4-step framework for identifying what to build. So step number 1 is understand the business problem. Understand what you're trying to solve for the customer and have a North Star based on that validated customer need. Now, this might as well be a North Star that you don't reach anytime soon, and that's totally fine. But the goal here is to be problem focused. Don't build a solution and then go looking for a problem. So decide the final outcome before you're investing any resources in building what you've decided to build. So step number 2, once you know your why and you've clarified your KPIs and business goals, is to start collecting that data. This data could be from your user research, from user discovery, from competitive intelligence or market insights. But while you're doing all of this, an important thing to remember is the value of insights you gain from this research is dependent on the questions you ask. So never ask open-ended questions to your customers or your audience. Always make sure that you are coming up with succinct questions that are going to help you guide the direction for your product. So step number 3 is once you have collected all this data, now is the time to start analyzing this data. So analyze the data based on measurable goals or outcomes that you've already defined in step number 1, and identify the relevant versus irrelevant data. Start taking out noise from all of this data and think about what are qualitative versus quantitative aspects, and all of this information is going to help you drive or identify investments and potential returns. So if you conduct product research the right way, you will identify the market opportunities and gain meaningful customer insights that will help you make these decisions with confidence. So the way to start visualizing or analyzing this data is first of all choosing a right representation of this data. This could be a bar chart or a pie chart or a histogram based on the kind of data you have and what insights you're trying to try out of that. But make sure that projection of data is in a form or in a format that is readable and understandable. So start analyzing the patterns, look for periodicity, look for seasonality, look for year over year trends, look for any consistencies or anomalies across the data. Be diligent in what you are looking to find and what it is that you found. Look for highlights. Look for key themes or major patterns. Look for outstanding data points or outliers. And once you have done all of this analysis, once you're armed with your takeaways, go that extra step. Make sure you're validating that data. The previous example, Netflix, to highlight what I'm alluding to here, which is Netflix didn't just take a leap of faith with all this data. There was another company which had the same analysis and which made a decision that was not as successful, right? So Amazon also had all this data, and what Amazon ended up doing was creating a comedy for 4 senators instead of a drama for 1 senator. So Netflix took the step ahead. They validated this discovery with the historical data, which is BBC's show or BBC's version of House of Cards that was aired back in 1990. Another marker that I want to touch on briefly is how to prioritize. So to prioritize a feature, I rely on this framework called Kano model, which is basically a 2 by 2 matrix of impact versus output. And when you start projecting these features on that grid, you will start to notice what are your low-hanging fruits. So the features or components that are going to be most highly impactful with the least amount of effort is probably where you want to begin with. So in the online world, the number of visitors on your website will equate to the number of opportunities you have to expand your business. So you need to always be testing and making sure that your users are finding content that's interesting to them. So the success of Amazon and Netflix is a great example to quote here. You will not see the same homepage of Netflix on your friend's account or even another profile that's within your account. And that's to how deeply they curate the content based on user preferences. In fact, it so predominantly relies on data that they utilize these mechanisms or techniques called multi-armed blended algorithms to hunt for the best cover or title for any show or movie. So they curate this content so much so that based on your profile type, you're going to see a different image of your favorite movie. So basically, if the ML model has identified you as someone in comedy category, then you are going to see image B in your home screen. So to be successful, always follow a test and learn approach. And here is a step-by-step process on how to test. So the first step is obviously to craft a hypothesis and know what to test. So your hypothesis, the mark of a good or strong hypothesis is that it should be testable. The goal should be to measure the correlation of a dependent variable with an independent one and identify the change that you're testing. So be very specific about what impact do you expect the change to have, who do you expect it to impact, and by how much, and for how long. So once you've gone through all these steps, you're going to come up with a strong hypothesis. The next level would be to start thinking about your test approach. So based on your requirements, you have to identify a correct test approach for your test. And it could be one of the four. It could be A/B testing, it could be multivariate testing, it could be your split URL testing, or it could be multi-page testing. If you have added changes to multiple sections of the page, you might want to employ multi-page testing instead of plain vanilla testing. So stay away from the cliche of employing only A/B testing. There are a lot of other ways to test. And the third one is always be measuring the statistical significance. And a quick tip here is your p-value, which is very easy to determine based on your sample size and the results that you're getting. So the tip here is the lower the p-value, the more statistically significant your results are, because the p-value essentially indicates the chances that your results might be random. So you need to have a p-value less than 5% in order to call a test a winner. And lastly, always consider external factors. Consider your macro and microeconomics. It is wrong to compare website traffic on the days when it gets highest traffic to the days when it witnesses the lowest traffic because of these external factors. So a quick example that comes to mind is if I'm running a test to see the conversion impact on vacation rental bookings because of a new feature, and it's scheduled around the first 2 weeks of October in Austin market. We also know that that's the time where Austin hosts the ACL Music Festival, so there is a good chance that there will be an influx of bookings coming in around that time. So I cannot be comparing the first 2 weeks of October with the last 2 weeks of September. I have to account for that event. So you have to make sure that you're doing an apples to apples comparison. So moving along, I know there are a lot of scenarios where A/B testing or any form of testing is not applicable. So for those scenarios, what you can do is you can measure the performance of your product or your feature against the success metric, which you would have already defined in phase one, which was building. Is going to help you early in the product life cycle with identifying the ideal customers and their segments. And later in the cycle, it helps you hone in on the usability and branding. So a few key success metrics that I always look to are number one, usage. So usage in terms of the percentage of new users who use the feature for the first time, coupled with engagement. So your daily or monthly or weekly active users based on their usage frequency and recency. So this is going to basically cover your depth, breadth, and frequency of use. So the next one is efficiency, which is probably the most important determinant. So to measure efficiency, simply look for one or more key workflows in your product. So anything from registration to onboarding to new feature activation, and measure how far does the user get in that workflow. So you're basically trying to see how does your conversion funnel look like, and if there is a common or persistent dropping point, then you know that's a problem area for your customers or your users. The last one is satisfaction. You can turn a qualitative reaction into an actionable quantitative measure by leveraging the insights from customer surveys. So one of the most common techniques employed here in the industry is your net promoter score. That is going to help you determine Who are your promoters? Who are your detractors? Who are those neutral customers in that cohort? So this is, by the way, one of my favorite scenes from the show. So in conclusion, the goal should not be to only promote and keep investing in products that work, but also to make the decision on when to pull the plug or kill a feature or a component that is not working. So always be open to re-strategizing, rebooting your product direction for the greater good. Make the decision to be agile. Someone has to. An example that comes to mind here is Amazon's Fire Phone. If Jeff Bezos had not killed it at the right time, they would have ended up investing a bunch of time in the product. So this brings us into the last and final section, which is how to gain agreement and develop a shared understanding for these decisions around the product roadmap, product vision, or the strategy. So one thing you could use there is stories that are driven by data, because compelling stories engage your customers. They elicit an emotion and foster loyalty, forging a meaningful relationship that goes far and beyond only your product and service. And that's how you develop brand loyalty. So make the decision to utilize data-driven storytelling because it allows us to extract the insight from data and communicate that insight in a compelling way. So here are two examples of brand that show us why it pays to always invest in telling data-driven stories. So the first example here is for Zillow. When Zillow realized that they were missing on an entire whole segment of customers, which is millennials, they decided that they already have data on what are the most reasonable places to make an investment. And they showcase this data on their website to entice these millennial customers. Um, Another example is Google and their year in search ads that they broadcast at the end of every year. So this one particularly in 2016, which was a 2-minute film, it was a collection of all the top viewed ads throughout that year. And it had such positive or overwhelming response from viewers that it was amongst the top 1% of all the ads tested throughout that year. So utilize storytelling for customers to increase platform stickiness and increase the traffic on the platform. Then another area is your teams. So you need to communicate timelines and dependencies. And lastly, stakeholders, because as a product manager, you need to be the internal advocate for your users or customers. So the product manager must incorporate inputs from different sources and evangelize and get buy-in from business partners. So the more data you bring into communication with all these different teams and stakeholders, the better your chances are in making sure that your product moves forward. So that brings us to the end of the presentation, and I would like to leave you with this thought that data can help you guide towards a decision. It cannot still make the decision for you, but what you can achieve out of employing data in decision making is that there is still a chance that you might fail, but you would have failed with a learning. You would have gauged what doesn't work, and that's equally important because knowing that you can now move forward in the right direction. So to conclude the session, I'd like to say thank you so much for listening in and hope you are a little more illuminated about decision making than you were at the beginning of this presentation. Would love to connect with you and hear from you. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. And stay safe and keep product managing until next time. See ya.